So, I'm going to talk about Symfony without the framework bundle. My name is Tobias. There's my Twitter handle. So if you want to harass me for the next 45 minutes, I can't really defend myself. I want to talk about this both because it's fun, but I want to talk about this because I believe people don't really care about performance too much. And I want to give you how you could do performance. And there's a thing called going bare, which is pretty cool. And it's a good way to learn what your application, what your framework really does for you. So this is why we want to talk about this. Oh, if I'm talking too fast or too slow, just wave your hands. I mean, I can't see the first two rows, so you are responsible of my tempo now. And there are too many lights, so I can't barely see you in the back. Anyhow, also my clicker works half the time. My name is Tobias. I work at a company called Happier. We're trying to match people and companies together on soft skills. I do plenty of Symfony stuff. I also run the PHP meetups in Stockholm, and I do plenty of open source. I started my open source career in Paris on a SymfonyCon. It was 2015, and PSR 6 just came out. And me and my friend, we're like, hey, let's build implementations for this. Let's build a cache storage. So we built PHP Cache, we built PHP Cache Bundle, and at the same time also started working with HTTP Plug, which is like an abstraction over Guzzle or other HTTP clients. And when you're working with HTTP clients, I mean, when you're working with abstractions, you start working with a lot of HTTP clients, you start working with a lot of mail clients, and then I build this this is how you should do a best practice API client. I also work with a lot of PSRs. PSR 7, and I do now PSR for clients. I'm maintaining Guzzle and Bus at the moment, and I do a lot of testing, and I do plenty of other things. The most interesting library here is, in my opinion, is the NSA library. NSA totally violates the class privacy, right? So accessing private properties or private methods is simple with NSA. Which is good for testing or horrible for everything. I mean, you decide. It's an interesting library. I hear this on Twitter. This is what we're going to work with today. Frameworks are slow. Have you heard this on Twitter? Have you seen this? People bashing frameworks for no such reason. No, nobody heard this. Yes, thank you. So, there are 3 simple words in this sentence, and their frameworks are slow. So let's investigate them one by one. I mean, this is obvious. But slow, I kind of think that's kind of means poor performance, right? I think it's easy to agree, if something is slow, we think the performance is not very good. So slow is poor performance, that's simple. However, frameworks. What's a framework? I'm actually wondering this, researching this talk, for a past year, I've been traveling around conferences asking smart people like yourselves, hey, what is a framework? I've never got one single good answer, or I never got a proper answer that I was happy with. And more specifically, since we're here, we wonder, what is Symfony? I know this seems like a rhetorical question, but if someone has the best answer, please shout out. What is Symfony? It's a framework, sure, but what is a framework? It's weird that we here all gathered, we want to go to SymfonyLive, but we don't know what Symfony is. A bunch of bundles. Yeah, maybe. So let's bring you back to a journey. This is Symfony 1.4 to be specific. When you installed Symfony 1, you did an SVN checkout, and you install everything. You got all the vendor, or the 2 vendors, but you got everything in one folder called your Symfony folder, right? And everything inside this folder was Symfony. If there was a command that inside this folder, it was a Symfony command. Everything else was your application, was your code. Seems pretty easy to know what Symfony is, right? There's a clear line between your code and what Symfony is. A few years forward, we have Symfony 2.8. We did a composer create project. Awesome. We didn't include all the vendors, but we still have this vendor Symfony folder, and we know everything in there was Symfony. Okay, So it still was a clear line. Symfony 3.4, I mean, we had a lot of great feature, but nothing really changed. It was still this folder. Also, we removed the deprecated, the Symfony community removed all the deprecated code. The interesting thing is now, in Symfony 4, we just create this skeleton. There's no Symfony folder anymore. I mean, sure, we have vendor Symfony, but that's just a random libraries, right? And in this skeleton project, we barely have any dependencies. I mean, the default compose.json looks like this. And this is only like, we require PHP, and we require some PHP extension. Then sure, Symfony console is a good library. Then it's a composer plugin, that doesn't really count. Then we have the framework bundle and Symfony YAML. And if I ask now, if this is what you get when you're installing Symfony, which of these dependencies is Symfony? Or which is it a combination of them? One could argue that using HTTP kernel and HTTP foundation, that's Symfony. Those two packages, that's Symfony, right? Because they are like the foundation of Symfony. And sure, this is the compose.json of the framework bundle. And sure, we do use HTTP foundation, HTTP kernel. However, with this definition of what Symfony is, would that mean that every application using PSR7, is that a send application? Or is that a slim application? No, I'm not really happy with this definition, not at all. So, what if we tackle it some other way? I mean, if you don't have this Symfony folder, there's no single dependency or no group of dependencies that says this is Symfony. Let's try to approach this problem from a different perspective. So I created a super scientific graph here, and I know in the early days of Symfony, we had a lot of magic going on. Like, you have to have a controller that was in the controller folder or it didn't work. And the commands had to be named something command or it didn't work. And the paths to configuration of views, they were impossible. Sometimes you have the bundle suffix, sometimes you have the @ sign, sometimes you didn't have the @ sign, and it wasn't really, it was a lot of magic and weird things going on. And I believe when time progressed and when Symfony 4 comes out, there's less and less of this magic, and it's more and more about user responsibility. The user decides where the controllers should be located and stuff. So the line that says this is Symfony has been more and more inexplicit, like more and more unclear. And the magic also has this decreased. So one could argue, does Symfony equals magic, and the less magic is better? I'm still not sure, actually. For me, I've decided, I think, Symfony, it's a community. We all Symfony, everybody that is here. Like, if the Symfony community was a pyramid, we would be the top layer of that pyramid, since we're here. Everybody who writes issues on GitHub is a part of a community. Everybody who writes questions or answer questions on Stack Overflow, everybody who's active on Slack or semi-active on Slack, everybody who's tweeting is part of this Symfony community. And Symfony is also an ecosystem of bundles, ecosystem of libraries, ecosystem of Docker images or gists. All of this is Symfony. So I would say Symfony is whatever we make, whatever we in the community make and publish. And it's not only about code. It's also blog posts, it's also meetups, it's also you going out with your friends and like having a chat in a bar or wherever. I mean, this is part of this community ecosystem that I like to call Symfony. And the cool thing about this is everybody can contribute. Really, it's not about doing large PRs with perfect code. It could be about sending a tweet. I mean, it could be about saying, hey, thank you for this conference. That's a great contribution to Symfony. And also, I intentionally left this slide blank. All jokes aside, this is actually a part of contributing to Symfony. And if you don't have the tweet right now, I mean, a little more focused. This is all a part of contributing to Symfony. And I believe that if Symfony is a community, if Symfony is an ecosystem, if Symfony is whatever we make, a framework, that's pretty much just only our code. and the code we decided that we want to depend on, right? So, click. So, if frameworks are slow, that really means that our code and the things we depend on is slow. So, let's talk about performance. Because now we know that our code is called slow. What is slow? So let's talk about performance. I got 3 rules for you. 3 rules that are always true when talking performance in computer science. Pause for effect. Rule number 1. Buy a better server. This is by far the most cheap way to get a better performance in your application. Hardware is so much more cheaper than software, and software, I mean people in this room. Developers are super expensive, so always simpler to buy a new server. Rule number 2, use varnish. I mean, most people do this, and this is awesome. I mean, this is seriously great. I mean, what if you let varnish handle 95% of your traffic? Obviously, it will be super quick for 95% of your use cases, right? And I said most people do this. There's tons of talks, tons of videos, tons of blog posts, tons of materials online telling you how to use varnish better. And you should, because varnish is awesome. However, this is not that kind of talk. If my talk was titled, How We Handle 1 Million Requests a Second, it would be a varnish talk. This is not the kind of talk. I want to talk about rule number 3. It's basically, this is the only way to speed up the execution of your code. You have to run less code. And this is what I would like to talk about. You all seen this, right? You all kind of know what this is. This is machine code or assembler code, I mean, you all kind of know this. And you know that every instruction here is an instruction in your CPU. It's the tick in your CPU. This is basically, if you write PHP echo hello world, this is basically what it is. So every this line is a tick in the CPU. This line is an instruction. So if you have a CPU that runs 3 gigahertz, it means that you can run 3 million of these lines every second. So in order to speed up the execution of your code, you have to have less ticks. I know this sounds super simple and super no, it sounds easy, but you never really thought about this way. So say they have a problem and hey, I want to have a fancy algorithm doing some fancy things. This algorithm is way quicker. If the algorithm is quicker, it means that we have less of these ticks. Everybody's on board. Good. So, more code, more ticks, less code, less ticks. Like a kind of proof of concept, this is the hello world in Symfony with different versions. I have Symfony version 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And I kind of want to show the number of lines of code, the number of lines of method calls, and this is just for executing hello world. And as you see, the less code we got, the quicker it is. But this is only hello world, right? Our application is not doing hello world. Our application is doing something very, very specific, but we're not doing hello world. If we were doing hello world, we should probably have something like this. This is the fastest framework there is for doing hello world. And if you will if people on Twitter saying, let's check out my micro framework, it's super quick, it's because it's super similar to this. I mean, because less code, less ticks, and less code is quicker. I mean, that's as simple as it is. So our application is not doing hello world. So we're gonna figure out what is our application doing, right? I mean, it's hard to solve. I mean, we're not trying to do a generic problem. We're gonna do something very specific. So first, we're gonna figure out what our application is doing. I have an example. I have a microservice, or call it whatever. I have this application in production. This is basically a URL shortener or a redirect something. And I think all of us here, I can agree that using a framework for this application will be overkill. And in fact, people argue with me, using PHP for this application is overkill. I mean, if I was better in doing a patch configuration, I would probably do this as a regex something, right? So the first thing we need to figure out when we start a new application is, what is our application doing? And where on this scale of complexity are we? I mean, are our application over here when we're only talking about super simple stuff like my redirect thing? Or are we way over here with our application where we might even have forms and complex stuff, right? We have to figure out, I mean, where we are. And if we are on like the Symfony skeleton sweet spot, then we use Symfony skeleton. Or if we're all farther away, we maybe even not use Symfony skeleton. That's too complex or too large for us. Right? So we first need to figure out like, what is our application doing? What do we really need? So I like to play a game. Whenever I start a new application, I like to play a game, and the game is called Do We Need This? Shall we play? Yeah, like woohoo! Okay, no. So let's play a game. Do we need this? Do we really need security? If our application is on a private network, do we need security? Probably not, right? And do we need forms? If we're doing a microservice of some kind that the user never sees, do we really need forms? If Symfony 4.1 has the fastest router in PHP, but if you only have 2 routes, do we need the router? I mean, you can only have an if statement. So do we need a router? I mean, do we need a kernel if you only get a small code base? I mean, dependency injection is great, but if you only have 10 classes, do we really need dependency injection? Also, do we need classes? So let's continue playing this game. Do we need HTTP? Say we only have a CLI interface. Do we really need HTTP? And if we do need HTTP, do we need HTTP Foundation? Or are we happy with superglobals? Don't get me wrong, superglobals are bad. It's impossible to get the remote IP. But maybe that's not what you're trying to do with your application. You may be trying to do something else. So HTTP Foundation might be too much. How about the messenger component? I mean, reading from a queue and writing to a database, that's a perfect microservice. And the messenger component might be too much. I mean, there is a PHP extension that talks to AMQP. That might be enough. Or you might think that using a messenger component is a lot simpler. I'm maybe not using AMQP. I maybe change to AVS something later. And I'm way quicker developing using an abstraction. And that balance, that's fine. You need to know that if you add the messenger component, you will have a slight performance impact, obviously, because it's more code. But you also might be fine with that because it makes you write an application way quicker and with less bugs. And about writing to a database, do we need doctrine? I mean, doctrine is great. Doctrine can be super performant if configured properly. But maybe that's also an overkill. Maybe just the PDO is good enough. So let's play this game. Do you need this? It's kind of hard to give like generic guidelines how to solve specific problem, obviously. So I'm gonna like show you how the common things that I usually do when I build application. I hope that's fine. Good, because I prepared. I prepared for just this. What I usually do, I mentioned messenger component already. I kind of like it. I also like the workflow component. Those of you who was in the workshop within the past few days, do you know that I like the workflow component a lot? It basically makes me write code that's with less bugs. So this is like from the documentation. This is how I create a simple state machine. I use this, for instance, when I have a microservice sending emails, and the emails can be in unsent, sent, errored, and opened. So with this component, the workflow component, I can make sure I never send the email twice. So using this will obviously have a performance impact because it's more code, but it makes the application more stable. That's why I tend to like it. I promise not to talk about cache anymore, but in the next version of Symfony, we have an amazing new cache interface. And I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. Like, oh, do we need a new cache interface? We got doctoring cache. We got PSR6 cache. We got simple PSR16 cache. And we got the other cache nobody heard about. Does Symfony really need another cache interface? When I was first shown this cache interface, no, when I first heard about the cache interface, I like, no, we don't need this. This is overkill. We don't need this at all. Then they showed me the interface, and it looks like this. And I'm like, this is the best interface ever. It's, as I see, it's super simple. It's only have one method. They're talking about adding another delete method, but I'm not sure. The cool thing here is it has stampede protection. No other cache has stampede protection built in like this. And I didn't know of stampede protection before, so I used, ignorant as I am, I assume you don't know either. So I'll tell you. So you see that you have a get and then a callable. So if I want to use this, say I want to get the cache for the key called foobar, and if there's a cache missed, they call the callable. And in this case, I calculate pi, and I choose to save this for an hour because pi might change, and then any second call to this will just hit the cache, right? So if I have a timeline like this, first time the cache is empty. First time I'm like, hey, give me foobar. The implementation itself will call the callable and make sure to calculate pi and then save it to the cache. And then every call after that will give me the cached version, right? However, after an hour, what if 100 new calls happens simultaneously? What would happen? We will start calculating pi 100 times and throw away 99 of them. This would obviously be a lot of impact on a service. That's why you see service spike like every hour, because the cache is suddenly cold. So how would you avoid this? Oh, we're gonna click, you see. How would you avoid this? The answer is stampede protection. So stampede protection automatically prematurely invalidates the cache for one call. Click. So sometimes during this hour, it just says, hey, we choose to recalculate pi again for one user, for one request only. And then we save it for another hour. So after the first hour expired, we got this 100 cache call. The cache will already be warm. So we don't have these massive pikes in server load. And this is cool because this is automatic. Something leaving the cache, something that's super cool since the last year or so is using the middleware pattern. I mean, I guess this was more famous now when PSR 15 came out, the middleware pattern PSR. Someone please nod. Okay then. The middleware pattern, basically, you can create an application doing this. So you just create a list of anonymous functions. You create a request response, and you create a list of anonymous functions, and then somehow you say, can you make sure you run yourself like a chain? So you start with, you start over here. Let's run middleware A, B, and C, and when they all run, we run backwards again, like C, B, A. So in this scenario, what I'm doing is I'm creating an anonymous function saying the first one is just make sure I have a get request. If I don't have a get request, I return a method not allowed. And the second middleware is just printing some response. So this is my full application with the middleware pattern. This is my index.php file. And if you will feel, oh, the runner, I mean the secret runner I have there at the bottom, that's not very secret. I'm just doing something like this. I add middlewares as a queue and run them one by one, like A, B, C, C, B, A, as I told. Does it make sense? So the point here is, with this, I've written a full application, very scalable because you can just add middlewares, and the middlewares are independent from each other, and I've written all the code myself. And if you don't like these horrible anonymous functions, just slap on an interface. This is a good interface. And like I said, Symfony 4 has the quickest router, 4.1 has the quickest router in PHP. It doesn't beat this router though. This router has a few if statements or a switch statement. But this router is not a generic router, it's specific for my code. So doing this could be my simple PHP index PHP file. And I actually written many applications like this. I've written a geocoder service like this. So basically, you give me an IP address, I give you the country back. And that full application looks something like this. I mean, first I look in the cache, and then I talk to New Relic because I want statistics, and then I do PHP geocoder to fetch me the actual values. And then I save it to the cache. And the cool thing here is, this is the index PHP file. I've written all of it. I'm in full control of every single line of code that is executed. Sure, in the cache middleware, I could use something like Symfony cache or Doctrine cache or whatever you like, but I'm in control. I'm responsible for every line of code executed. And if you need something more or better than this, let's add a custom kernel. Like a custom kernel might allow you to have configuration in YAML. A custom kernel might give you the option to have a null cache or dummy cache in development and a proper cache in production. So you have the concept of environments. And at first, like, oh, a kernel, that sounds scary. But a kernel, that's pretty simple. You just create a new class and you call it the kernel, and that's pretty much your kernel. And in this case, I want to have a container. So bear with me here. This is a slide with a lot of code. I construct with environments and say if I'm debugging or not. Then I have this code, which I just copied from index.php. You recognize this, right? All my middlewares and then middleware runner. You've seen this before? Great. And I want to make this a little bit more performant, so I'm actually building a container. The container helps me to do configuration with YAML and stuff. So first I'm checking, do we have a cache container? If we don't have a cache container, or if we're debugging, let's create a container. Let's create a container builder. So the first thing, I'm slapping on some static parameters on there. Then I'm saying, hey, load the files called services YAML and services underscore environment YAML. And then I just compile it and save it to cache. This is all my container. And this container, this is all my container. And this container allows me to have a file like this. I mean, you're all very familiar with files like this, right? This is normal Symfony configuration. And we still have written all the framework or the whole application ourselves. However, if we want to have, you see there's no auto-configure here, because we have to do some more boilerplates to make sure auto-configure. So we add these few lines to our container. We say something like, oh, if you see a class implementing the event subscriber interface, please add this tag on it. Or, hey, if you see a class that actually is a command, add this tag on it. And some other boilerplate to make sure we get more and more features. So if you feel like, oh, this is a lot of boilerplate, this is too much code to write myself, then just use the framework bundle. This is actually what the framework bundle does for you. It just writes up a lot of boilerplate for you. And using the framework bundle, we can maybe use, we can use a kernel like this. It's this very same code. I mean, I still configure my services YAML, I have some routes, and I show me the cache director and log director. It's still the very same thing. And the cool thing here is these three entries. I can use the HP kernel, which gives me the request loop, like kernel request, kernel response, kernel exception, and stuff like that. And I'm able to use bundles. That's pretty sweet to integrate to third-party bundles, right? And I use the microkernel trait. And you might have heard of the microkernel trait. It's just a trait that helps you to configure things easier. This is just some configuration. And I can tell you a secret, or I'm not sure if it's a secret anymore. I can tell you something. Fabien does not like this trait at all. He doesn't like the name of it. He says there's nothing micro about this trait. It's just a normal kernel. So this kind of shows you like a little bit Symfony under the hood and a little bit how you build yourself. And when you're building everything yourself, and when you know every line executed, it's super easy for you to handle your performance. You know which line is executed, and you know where it's slow. Or at least you should know where it's slow. At least you could have a hunch on where it's slow. So I'm gonna repeat this for you, like how to improve performance, you do this, or in more generic terms, you buy a better computer, you cache everything, and you run less code. So these are in order, and they're in order for a reason. It goes from very, very cheap to more expensive. And I would say, doing number 3, that's actually, if you're not doing anything crazy, there's actually no real reason for doing number 3 at all. The only reason for doing number 3 is because it's fun. And sure, programming should be fun, so we should all do number 3. I'm just, for the record, saying number 1 is always better. I'm not done yet, don't worry. If you think your application is slow, you need to find out, right? You need to figure out exactly, I mean, since you're in control of all your code, you know where everything is, it's easy to do profile application to find out if it's slow. There's a lot of profiles out there. I use Blackfire because it's simple and easy to set up. And if you look at this application, can you tell me where I spend the most time? Why is this application slow? Sorry? This in the middle? Yeah, what is this doing in the middle? I can barely hear you, but I assume you said it spends time loading classes. Especially here. I mean, don't get me wrong, auto-loading is great, but loading classes takes forever. This is way better in PHP 7, thanks to some tricks in Composer, and it's great, but we still spend a lot of time here in auto-loading, right? I've stolen these 2 slides. These 2 slides are the best slides ever, with permission, obviously. So let me play a game. What if the PHP pipeline was a restaurant? Right? So, which means that the client should be our customer. The client is the customer, the server is the restaurant, the request is the order, the response is the food, the application who makes the response is the chef, and the PHP daemon is the waiter waitress. Are we happy with the rules now? Happy with the rules? So the PHP pipeline as a restaurant would work something like this. The customers enter the restaurant, waitress takes the order, the waitress creates a chef somehow, chef makes the food, and then the waitress brutally murders the chef. Right? If I asked you as like management consultants how we can improve our restaurant, like don't kill the chef every time, right? So why are we doing this in PHP? This is a normal PHP workflow. Like the browser comes and talks with the Nginx. Nginx talks on a protocol called fastCGI to PHP FPM. PHP FPM has like a pool thread of process already running. And when a request comes in, I think I can click here. When a request comes in, like we throw up the application and kills the chef times time, like this, which obviously takes a lot of time. And if we didn't have PHP FPM, this would be even slower because we wouldn't have a pool of PHP threads running. You have to start up a thread, and then you have to create an application, and then you kill everything. So PHP FPM makes it way quicker, but it's not quick enough. You have to see this animation again. So if you're a bit smarter, if you don't want to kill the chef, maybe we implement PHP FPM in PHP instead. So PHP is the fastCGI client. So when we obviously just kill one application time to make sure we don't have performance issues or memory leaks and stuff. Maybe we'll kill another sometimes. So how would we do this? How would we achieve this? I mean, fastCGI is a pretty complex protocol, and we don't really want to implement that ourselves. So luckily, there's a library for this. saying at the bottom. So we basically wrap our kernel, wrap our application within this PHP fast CGI client. And you see here this is our application at the moment. We just get a new request and add a new response. If we wanted to, we could have our middleware pattern here. Oh, sorry. We have a middleware pattern here inside of this kernel. And we could also wrap a full Symfony application in here. This is me creating a special kernel, and this is a special kernel for this kind of application. And I know that frameworks are not slow. I mean, it's basically just our code, and the code we write, and the code we depend on. And if you add a lot of things, it will be slower, obviously. But if you follow the tips and tricks that I mentioned today, you can easily achieve this. You can easily achieve this for every application. I mean, in fact, you can even do this. And I've done this talk once or twice before. And whenever I've done this talk, people are like, ooh, Tobias, does it really work? Ooh, can you really do this in production? Ooh. Yes, you can. This is New Relic, and as you see, I have this specific application has less than 2 milliseconds in response time. I want you to remember one thing from my talk, is that we are Symfony. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you have any questions. We have a bit of time for questions. Also, please give me some feedback on this talk. What do you like, what you didn't like? And also give all the speakers feedback on their talks, what you like and didn't like. I had the mic for questions. Did anyone have a question? Everything was crystal, I guess. Oh, you can ask the question in German if you want to, and hopefully I have a friend who can translate. A question over here. Wait for a minute on the mic. Yeah. 4th row.
Thanks for the great talk first. And my question was that you showed that you have in production under 3 milliseconds.
Yeah.
But the question is that what kind of application is it?
Oh, that's an interesting. That's the best question ever. I usually get away with this. No. This is an application that just reads from a queue and then saves into a graph database. So I basically have a recommendation engine. So when everything's happening in my main application, I dispatch an event in a queue, and then the queue then something else reads from the queue, writes to the database. So yes, this is a very lightweight application, but that's the such application you should build. It's not the full website with forms and complex stuff like that. That's a good question. I usually get away with this. Excellent. If not, thank you for your time, and I'll make sure to be around. At least I'll see you at the after party later. Thank you.